All right. Welcome everyone who's joining us. This is the 57th OpenChain webinar. This time we're doing a webinar about the open source initiative. OSI has led the activities at the foundation of open source for a very long time. It was founded in 1998 and has helped inspire people in many ways since then. It's perhaps most famous the list of open source licenses that meet that definition. Of course, it does other things too, and right now, OSI is working on AI. Today's webinar will be a chance for us to understand OSI and understand what it's doing today better. We're very lucky to have Stefano Mafulli, a very old friend and executive director of OSI on the line. As always, with OpenChain webinars, this is a space where you can ask questions. It should feel and act like a webinar that happens to be a real workshop presentation. We are going to keep things informal, and you are very welcome to invite your friends and so on as we go along into this meeting. The meeting is recorded. We will be posting the webinar on our website. The last piece of administration I have today is to flag that the Linux Foundation has an antitrust policy that applies to all of our meetings, webinars, and so on. You can find the full antitrust policy on our website. And if you're from one of our member companies, you can ask any questions of our council and the Up to Grove. But back to the main thing. Stefano, OSI, what's happening? What's going on? What do we need to know? I'll hand over to you here.
Thank you, Shane. Let me set up the okay, sharing. I love it. How I cannot share my screen.
It's sharing now, or it's got weird gray bars on it?
It's got weird gray bars on it. Let me try to share from the let me try again. Let me see if this is just a temporary thing, and it's not. I love it. This worked last time I did this. So let me try to present from the other application. Let's see. Okay. Present.
While Stefano's preparing to change his presentation machine, I'll just note that one thing that's been interesting since Stefano and I started working together is how open source has dramatically increased in size. Nowadays, it is, my goodness, how many billions of dollars of revenue per year, and so many thousands of companies involved. When we started, it was a much smaller group, and that provides Stefano with unique insight to be able to help understand the evolution and how and why OSI is going in certain directions. Stefano, I'll hand over to you. I can see your slides on the screen.
Cool. Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing this year at OSI. I want to start by reminding people about our mission, which is to steward the open source definition. And that the word stewarding is something that I was not really familiar with as a foreign language English speaker. But I came to really love the concept. We are not defining open source. We're maintaining that definition for the rest of the community. In other words, we hold what the community really think that the open source values are, how the open source values are represented, and we maintain that definition. We guard it. We try to keep everyone sticking to it, and we tend to correct people, but we're also very open into having conversations around its meaning and the value that it brings to the community. So far, we had a very good understanding and fun while doing that. We're also a non-profit organization, meaning that we are a charitable one. We're quite different in terms of setup from other foundations and other groups, including the Linux Foundation has a slightly different nonprofit mission. We defend and we work for the benefit of the public. And this is relevant for what we've been doing a lot, what's been very visible in what we've done this year. And we have basically, we have organized our work around 3 programs. One is the license and legal program. This is where we have the, this is where we work with the maintaining the list of approved licenses and clearly defined as a project. I will give a brief overlook later on. We have a policy and standards program, and we've been active in this one with setting the Open Policy Alliance, which is a new initiative, a new project inside this program, collecting the interests of the nonprofit organizations in the open source space. And we have an advocacy and outreach program where we organize events, meetings, we participate to other events and meetings. And we've been in this space, we have organized 2 projects. And one is the deep dive on AI, which I'm going to be spending quite a lot of time after to give you an overview of what we're doing in the space. We're also, this year, we took over the community that Red Hat used to maintain at opensource.com, and we have taken over that community on a new website. And speaking of which, I mean, these are the projects inside these 3 buckets of activity. Clearly defined, it's something that is a project that it's a distributed database crowdsourced information collected that clarify the licenses in packages. So projects like PyPI or NPM, a lot of packages get integrated and shipped into products by corporations and companies and projects. Many, oftentimes, these projects don't have the correct information about their licenses, or there are conflicting information. Clearly defined is a way to correct that information without necessarily having to work upstream to get patches merged, and it improves the quality of your SBOMs and your reporting and supply chain reporting. I think this is a project that has been presented at the OpenChain group recently by Nick Vidal, who is the community manager for the open source initiative. On clearly defined, it's this year we made quite a lot of progress in terms of adoption. GitHub has now integrated it into their product, and they're helping the project to be easier to deploy and improving the documentation. And one of the objectives that we have with 2024 is to change the governance of the project so that it can have more distributed responsibilities between its members and contributors. The Open Policy Alliance on the policy and standards is basically has been the reaction to the activity that we've done in the hyperactivity that the end of 2022 and 2023 have brought to the open source world. We were living in a world where open source was regulated only as a side effect of other regulations, think patent law or antitrust laws, and open source by being so ubiquitous, the communities were being regulated that way. But starting this year, starting at the end of last year, there was a very big shake-up and wake-up calls from regulators in the United States and Europe, most visibly, where telling us that we need regulation is coming directly for open source. And the Open Policy Alliance is a reaction to that regulation, to this regulatory regulation intensity. It's a collective of other nonprofit organizations that don't have a representation or don't have the power for themselves to have their instances, their thoughts represented, their comments represented at the regulators level. So we built on top of the OSI list of affiliate organizations, and we're giving them a space where we can discuss the local regulatory frameworks and share the experiences of the very various groups in international spaces to bring them to the local regulators. And then opensource.net, as I mentioned, we launched it as a new website. We're looking for content on this website. We're looking for news. We're looking for how-tos and features about your experience as contributors to open source or as a starter, founders of new open source projects. We're pretty much happy to receive your contributions. And on Deep Dive AI, I'll talk about that later. Probably some of you might be interested in knowing what's the status of the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe. So it's reaching its final weeks before it gets approved. There is a very good sense that the political will is to have this regulation passed before the end of the year, before the end of December. The history of this regulation has forced us to start the Open Policy Alliance. Because when we got wind of this, when this regulation started to became public at the end of 2022, it was pretty clear that the many nonprofits in the open source world were not consulted, and the text was pretty hostile to the development of open source projects. So the OSI worked very closely with groups, other nonprofits in Europe, like NLNet, Free Software Foundation Europe, and the Open Forum Europe, catching up with the regulators and explaining why open source is not a cloak of invisibility for big tech companies, which was the approach that they used when they drafted the regulation. As public charities, we made a lot of inroads during the year 2023, and we saw these inroads becoming very clear when we received the leaked text of the during the final negotiations. It's called the trialogue. During this trialogue in the past weeks, we noticed the new text had a very large new concept of a nonprofit steward of open source project. The steward of open source project is a brand new concept that was introduced thanks to our educational effort. And now the text is still being negotiated. We don't know what the final form is going to be, but I mentioned we expect this to pass before the end of the year. We'll keep you updated. So then the other big activity that we've done this year that we will continue keep us busy for another year is looking for the definition of open source AI. We started this effort because there was a fear that the complexity of AI would make open source irrelevant, because technology evolves. This is something that has been a crucial piece. Technology evolves, and when the technology evolves, a lot of the concepts that are in the open source definition that was written in 98 based on concept from the 70s, they come in crisis. So having a being the steward of the open source definition means also researching, learning new technologies, and evaluating why and if any of those concepts need to change. And for AI, it's quite clear that the introduction of the dependencies of between, for example, data and AI systems challenges a lot of our assumptions. So we must look into this, and we must do it now because regulation is already coming quickly, and the drafts of the AI Act in Europe, for example, they have special provisions to exclude open source models, but there is no really a clear understanding of what an open source model looks like and what it is, what it does. There is also another factor of acceleration of why we need to take care of this, finding this definition now, is that the market is already full of new models being released and being released with licenses that are not meant to be used for machine learning or artificial intelligence in general. And it's already happening. We're starting to see the emergence of champions and big gatekeepers, that gatekeepers being corporations or special interest groups that have access to large amounts of data, or they know how to develop and deploy large language models, and they release them under conditions that make it hard for others to join and innovate on top. And the rapidity, the speed at which everything is happening is another factor for us to be looking at AI now. And so you are familiar with the typical machine learning pipeline, where there is data on one hand, and that gets trained, used for training, and it produces weights, and they're fed into a model that goes into an application. And if something goes wrong in this picture, and someone may go to jail or may be denied a loan. So developers of machine learning have tremendous responsibility, and that's why the governments around the world are both excited and nervous about the general availability of these tools. So we need to, as open source developers, we have always thought about the fact that if there is a bug somewhere in a system, if you have access to the source code, if you have access to complete documentation and a lot of information, if you have the right to study, modify, share, and copy the code, the program, you can fix it. But with a machine learning system that is made of so many steps and so many different components, what do we need in order to fix this applications or systems? That's what we're trying to understand. And in all this process that we started, we actually started looking at AI in 2022, at the beginning of 2022. So we've been doing this for more than 2 years. We came to realize that the legal landscape is quite complicated. For example, we don't know if what kind of legal frameworks are applied or can be applied to any of the components of the machine learning pipeline. For example, models may not be covered by copyright. Data definitely has not only copyright, but also other regulation, like privacy regulation, for example, is quite clear, quite visible. Data sets themselves may have more than just copyright. And think about the sui generis database right in Europe. So it's a quite complicated matter from the legal perspective. And the outputs also of machine learning, generative AI, has raises questions. Like it's so um, there is a lot of issues going around on the AI systems. The core issues that I see is the amount of data that is required, and issues that are related to finding the data, curating it, make sure that it has no bias, and what you need to do in order to use that raw data, what kind of permissions you have, or requirements to distribute them afterwards. For example, the models themselves, what goes into the model, what's necessary to know if they have issues, and how to fix them. There are other core considerations to make around the knowledge that is necessary to set up the training clusters, the hardware, which is scarce and relies also on a very proprietary ecosystem at the moment, and the deployment of AI systems with big promises, but also like think about the self-driving cars, but also high risks, including, for example, the algorithms that are promoting fake news, or the risk of making wrong predictions and forcing humans to make bad decisions based on, think about all the algorithms that are being used in courts in the United States to predict recidivisms and other, the possibility that someone who would commit a crime again if released early from jail. Very, very important considerations where there is a lot of confusion all around. So we're trying to take a little bit of a more calm and approach, and try to pause and isolate ourselves from these snake oil discussions, but have another discussion that is about finding the principles that we want to see represented in an open source AI, knowing from the history of what happened to the history of how open source came to be. And we're trying to really retrace those historic steps and accelerate them a little bit. So it is quite important to rethink about how open source came to be and look at the history for inspiration. In the early days of computer science, software was just widely available, and it was not covered by copyright, and no one was really thinking about what the legal frameworks had to be. Software was being copied and shared between the hacker community at the MIT lab, and the researchers, they had complete freedom to run, copy, share, and modify software. It was the technical introduction of portable code that started to create that sense of, oh my God, I have this software now, this new artifact. What am I going to do? And copyright was started to be applied. And with that, also the privatization of knowledge that was going to be ripped out of the research environment and brought into private corporation. It was in this time, in this framework, that Richard Stallman started to think about how copyright and secret were being used to remove from science, remove knowledge, share knowledge from the scientific community. He started to write the GNU Manifesto, and finally wrote the licenses that were coming together to be used with the software that he was writing. So the sequence of events is really important. There was first a new artifact of the human intellect that started to emerge, and that's the software. Then a community was established around the principles that they wanted to safeguard. the GNU Manifesto. Then the new software, the GNU operating system, was being shared with a legal agreement that subverted the system, like the copyleft license as a hack on copyright. So even if you don't buy into the whole copyleft idea, I believe that the whole open source ecosystem we work in has thrived despite of copyright. We used it as a necessary evil to realize the benefits listed in the GNU Manifesto. And the benefits come from the special golden rule that if I like a program, I must share it with other people who like it. So open source is basically is about delivering users self-sovereignty in their software. Presumably, an open source AI, would be aimed at delivering self-sovereignty when it comes to use of and input into AI systems. The four freedoms for free software are also, I think, that we need to keep an eye on for historical reasons, but also because practically they're a good reference also for our future. So in practice, the four freedoms enable delivering users so this capacity to decide from themselves. Developers have independence. They don't need to engage with others with another party. So when we want to think about how to transport the golden rule of the GNU Manifesto and the principles of the free software and open source in the early days to AI systems, I think it's fairly easy to replace the word program and use the word AI system instead. So that's a starting point for our conversation. What do I need to share an AI system? And we started asking that question to ourselves as I mentioned, in 2022, and we started to learn a few things. So the group that we have assembled, a very wide global multi-stakeholder conversation, is that they all came to an agreement that we need to define open source AI in very generic terms. We cannot be having an open source definition for computer vision, and another one for machine learning, deep learning, and et cetera, because that would make things too hard and too complicated. In general, following also how many international bodies have been approaching the issue, they all started talking about AI systems as a whole, and the OECD is the one who came up with a definition in 2029, and just updated it, amended it at the beginning of November. And this definition of by the OECD has been adopted in other regulation, at least in the United States and Europe, seems to be well understood. One of the the one issue that has, though, it's that even the amended version still uses the word decisions as one of the possible outputs of an AI system. And this is very controversial, the word decisions. Even inside the OECD, some of their working group and of experts have raised objections around the fact that an AI system should be making decisions, because that's where someone goes to jail if there is no human oversight over that decision. So aside from this caveat, this definition seems to be well accepted, and we may use it as a basis for our conversation. We're using it as our basis for the later conversations. We've also learned that agreed that AI deserves to enjoy the same benefits of open source. Developers, researchers, deployers of AI systems, they all think that the benefits of open source, of transparency, collaborative improvement, rapid innovation, all the values and all the side effects of the principles we agreed on with the GNU Manifesto, basically transported need to be transported into the AI space. We also noticed that the policymakers, instead, they're less concerned about innovation and more concerned about other issues, especially fairness, safety, trustworthiness. And this means that if we want to have an open source AI that is actually adopted and supported by policymakers, we need to make sure that open source AI can be safe, reliable, and fair, responsible, etc. Because if open source AI isn't starts going in the exact opposite direction of being trustworthy or transparent or reliable, then there will be no open source AI, because regulators are really, 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 really concerned about these issues and not about openness. All right, so the next step is for us, what are these basic freedoms that we need? We went into drafting mode starting in June this year, and we came up with with a starting point for an open source AI definition. We have a draft at this point is draft 3 that is public, and it's made of the definition of AI system at the beginning, a preamble, where in this preamble we basically have enumerated some of the basic reasons for why we want an open source AI, what does this look like, what kind of advantages we hope to have. Think of this as a very short, condensed view, summary of the GNU Manifesto. The first part of the definition of an AI system is necessary because in the 70s, when the GNU Manifesto was written, the concept, well, actually in the 80s, 85, when it was written, there was no need to define the program. If I remember the golden rule, if I like a program, I must be able to share with others who like it. The program there's no real need to have a definition because it was already understood. The scientific community knew what a program was. In this case, the AI system, we don't have a clear understanding yet, and in fact, there are competing different variations of what that means. So we need to have establish at the very top what we mean when we say AI system in the preamble. Then there is a short mention of what's out of scope, and this is necessary. We thought this is necessary because there is so much pressure for having somewhere the acknowledgement that AI should not do any harm, or should only be used for good reasons, should not be used to disobey the law, and other good reasons, for other good reminders of being good citizens. And some groups are advocating for the open source definition for AI to include those pieces. we believe, and in general, also the drafters and the legal community around it, and historically the open source movement has never taken those issues as part of the definition, because the open source initiative, well, there are a series of good reasons for why we don't engage into ethical uses or non-commercial definition of non-commercial. In other words, we don't engage into restricting the field of use of software, because it's impossible for us to enforce it, or it's impossible for us to even have context when we evaluate licenses, so that we wouldn't be able to do anything with that. So we define out of scope in here. The next part, the 4 freedoms for open source AI, this is where we spent 4, and we're going to have one more workshop in San Jose in a couple of weeks, where we've been discussing and presenting the concepts, and we're wordsmithing the starting point of an open source AI definition, which once we have these freedoms set, and we acknowledge that there is consensus around it, we're going to move into a next phase, which is getting a checklist from those freedoms to review licenses for the components of typical AI systems, and we're going to make examples in this case. So this is the list of 4 freedoms that we have in version 3 are this, and they're very, very similar to the list of freedoms for software, the 4 freedoms for software, slightly adapted to the concept of AI system using the AI system definition by the OECD. Then, so the process is public for reviewing and looking at the drafts. If you go to this website, you will find version draft 3. And we're going to be collecting comments, and I'm going to be releasing before the end of the year version 4, based on the conversations I've had with people at the workshop that I just run in Addis Ababa with the group from the United Nations and UNICEF, the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And there's going to be another workshop I mentioned at the AI Dev event from the Linux Foundation in San Jose, the 12th of November, if I remember correctly. And we're going to be releasing a new version, but the comments are also available from the website opensource.org in the deep dive space. After these comments, then we're going to have more meetings in 2024. I'm already organizing one in Brussels, and we're working on a full calendar for the rest of the year. So with that, I'm going to encourage you to become a member of the OSI as an individual, but also if your company wants to support more of this work and on artificial intelligence research and understanding and coming to an open source AI definition that is agreed upon before the end of the 2024, I encourage you to get in touch with me so that we can discuss how to donate to us. And I'm open to questions, and if there are any.
I've got one to get us started, Stefano. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation and for coming here today. One thing that may come up is that we have a lot of licenses appearing, or it feels like we have a lot of licenses appearing that don't meet the open source definition requirements. For example, we have those licenses like business source license. And it feels like a recent trend that more and more companies are using these licenses. And it also seems like a lot of these companies seem to confuse open source code with a product as opposed to a platform, a place to develop from. But I was just wondering to what extent did these new licenses provoke new conversations and energy in OSI to, look at the license list again and communicate more loudly around the world about what open source is, how it is defined?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good question. So yes, there has been a lot of new licenses and a lot of visible efforts to change for projects to and products to change their licensing terms. To to this extent, I am one of those who thinks who that the open source world, the open source movement hasn't paid attention to to the needs of business enough. And on one hand, I recognize that the introduction of new ways to deploy software in cloud, for example, and the software as a service, the delivery model has challenged a lot of the assumptions that are in the open source definition and the free software definition and inside the GNU manifesto. A lot of and I, and I think that there hasn't been enough conversation. There haven't been enough conversations around these changes, these challenges. My opinion is that these licenses are definitely not good licenses. They're not. They are. They denote one um, how much the companies that are using and making these changes, they are ignoring the fact that their software itself is built on hundreds, if not thousands, of packages delivered and deployed by, I mean, developed by others. And if you look at the SBOMs of many of these like recent changes, you will notice that none of them has developed everything 100% of their code in-house. They don't hold 100% of the copyright of the software that they ship to customers. So it's really sometimes it really makes me upset, the rhetoric that you see in the press. And in fact, we're working to build a corpus of new material to highlight this hypocrisy of some of these corporations, because then these need to be called out. That said, I do think that we need to have a more civil, productive conversation around business models and business challenges in an era of large corporations being so well established and having built a large moat around their businesses that prevents competition to happen or slow down innovation in some form.
A follow-up to this comes on the AI front. OSI is going front and center on the AI discussion. That's huge. And I wondered, to what extent are you getting a lot of feedback or, a lot of different opinions from the vast number of new AI providers around the world? A lot of people seem to have their own models, their own releases, and even some people are releasing stuff calling it perhaps open source, and it just doesn't meet the definition.
Yeah, that's where, yes, there are lots of new releases, lots of new models released with new licenses, and they don't meet the open source definition. A lot of the conversations I've had with developers and deployers of AI systems, they seem to be so concerned about the being caught into some bad actor abusing of their software that other systems in general, that they do write in the licenses all sorts of provisions that cannot be really enforced, or they don't have the power to enforce. Like, think of the some university writing, you cannot use it for bad uses, you cannot use to impersonate people, you cannot use this and that. But it's really, there is a lot of wishful thinking inside there, and cover your behind type of approach. It's something that I haven't seen in software developers, that consciousness of the damage that they're whatever they're deploying, or they're publishing. There's more consciousness about the abuses, and I think it's refreshing to see to some extent, because the fact that software has been delivered without proper security for many years, by so many people, is kind of it's very surprising to me. So it's kind of refreshing to see a group of new developers in a new field being very conscious about the social impact, and the impact in general that their tools can have on society, and trying to take a step back and say, hey, but don't do anything harmful with it. At the same time, we need to be able to explain better. We, as open source communities, we need to explain better the benefits of not having to be the gatekeepers in one way or another, and also the practical implications of putting those terms in licenses that basically they have no meaningful way of being enforced. They can only be enforced in places where uh, where there is law, where it's a really complicated matter, but we don't have enough material, when enough teachings, material, or foundational documents that we can use to say, go and learn here why there is no field of use restrictions, what are the advantages, and what are the obstacles if you insist on putting field of use restriction, for example.
And we have some great follow-up questions as well. So one question that came in is from Victor, and it's that most open source discussions, like licensing and security, are focused on code. How can communities collaborate better when it comes to defining open source data or models?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what the conversation that we're having right now is a lot around data, around models. What are the components that what is the very crucial question that we need to ask in the next months is, what is the best way to make modification to an AI system? If you need to modify an AI system, what do you actually need? For software, we spend a little bit of time, and in fact, even GPLv3 has a very clear definition of complete and corresponding source code, and that's quite well accepted and understood. On AI system, we need to spend a little bit of cycles, a few cycles, to really understand what that means, because the open data movement, the open hardware movement, open knowledge, open science in general, they have definitions, but they work in the context of data in isolation. When they become part of a larger system, I think that we cannot simply reuse, or we need to check the viability of reusing the definition of open data inside the context of open source AI.
Now we've got a great question in as well from Fukuchi-san. He's sending his thanks for this great talk. And he says that you explained that one of the freedoms, one of the key tenets of open source is the freedom to study. And he's questioning, isn't studying the same as modify in open source software? I suppose, he said, the open source AI definition requires more than source code to be open. It also needs data, method, and theory. Is my understanding correct? So he's got two things. One is, isn't studying and modifying perhaps the same? That's part one. And part two, won't the open source AI definition need not just code, but also data and method to be open?
Mm. So study and modify, I see them as two codependent freedoms. You need to be able to have both. Study neither is sufficient on its own. If you can modify, I mean, to be able to modify kind of implies that you need to be able to study it. So, but you could be modifying something without having access to the source code. For example, if you get a fairly simple binary program, you can hack on it, you can do some tweaks, you can decompile and or work on the binary itself for the simpler ones. But it's study that gives you access to the complete and corresponding source code to see exactly how the intentions of the programmer and the why 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 and where things have been written and in what way. And for the second question, let me
Second
pull it up.
question, because open source AI definition requires more than
Oh,
source.
yes.
Yeah, data, method, theory.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly why we're doing this exercise. It seemed trivial at the beginning, like it's trivial to review the four freedoms and change a little bit of the words and put them in and put them as the four freedoms for open source AI. The exercise was with many. We run these in-person workshops, and it was eye-opening how different people reacted to rereading that text and trying to come up with better words, because the freedom to study in an AI system means exactly that, having access to the publishing papers, the intentions of collecting and assembling the data, what went into the data set itself, so that you can see if there was, what bias is included in there. And that's a different story from having the freedom to modify it later on, because think about an AI system that is a computer vision system with that detects cancer in X-rays. Most likely, a system like that has been built with private data from different hospitals, and they will not be able to share that data. So by having the freedom to study means that you have enough and well documented information about the building of the data set and the training mechanisms that they used, whether it's federated learning or some sort of encrypted stuff. You know what it is, but you will never be able to have access to the full data set to retrain, to run modifications or to test it on your own. But you can study it, right? And for the modifications, we're going to have in these cases, we're going to have a conversation about what are the basic needs to modify a system like this. We don't know yet because we haven't started that phase of the open source AI definition, but we will know. I'm assuming we will know soon.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we're nearly at the hour here. If anyone has a last question, we can cover it. If not, all I can say is thank you so much indeed, Stefano. This presentation will be going in front of the global community across multiple time zones, and we'll be, of course, advertising and re-advertising it to make sure that as many people in the supply chain know this is happening. Clearly, this is a really excellent place for people to center their energy on open source and AI. Would it be possible to also share your slides after this meeting?
Sure. I can do that.
Fantastic. Stefano, thank you once again for giving us this great high view introduction to what's going on. And I'm sure
Absolutely.
back to you with questions and follow up in the future.
Absolutely. I'm more than open to respond, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your great audience. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone on the line, thank you for coming. See you at the next webinar. Have a beautiful, safe day.